on Sunday. We're nearly at the end of January and it feels to me like it's getting towards crunch time for the Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak originally defined himself as all about fixing problems and steadying the ship after the chaos of last year. But is that enough? If he's going to have a chance of winning the next election, does he need to offer something a bit more exciting, a little bit less managerial, rather than just defining himself as more competent than the Conservatives who've gone before? We'll be exploring all the big issues with our guests on the show this morning. In just a moment, we'll hear from the Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove. And for Labour, we'll be talking to the party's Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. We'll find out what Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, makes of what Michael Gove has to say this morning and the government's progress on levelling up so far. And following the Chancellor's call for an end to declinism over the state of the UK economy, we'll be talking to the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce on the programme as well. Plus, we are going to bring you an extraordinarily powerful interview with Hannah Lewis, who survived the Holocaust but saw a Nazi death squad kill her own mother. Well, let's crack straight on, shall we? We start this morning with the Levelling Up Secretary, and it's more than 5.5 years since the Grenfell Tower fire that killed 72 people. And Michael Gove this morning says the government is partially to blame for the disaster because of poor guidance on buildings. I spoke to Michael Gove just a few moments ago. Thank you so much for being on the programme this morning. I think it's quite refreshing to actually start with policy after the last few weeks, but I did want to talk to you about policy. We all remember the absolute tragedy of the Grenfell fire. 6 years on, it feels like you're finally doing something on unsafe cladding. What is the plan?
Well, we're making clear to developers that we've got a new contract that they've got to sign. So the people who are responsible for erecting buildings, which we now know are unsafe, have to pay the costs of making sure that those buildings are safe. We've been trying to deal with this problem, as you quite rightly say, for a number of years. And there have been well-intentioned efforts, actually, by lots of people. But the nub of it is that until recently, the leaseholders, the people actually in the flats, were being asked to consider paying for some of the costs for things that they were not responsible for. So that should end now that we're publishing this contract and saying that developers, and to be fair, they accept the responsibility, should pay up.
Sky's city editor, Mark Kleiman, reported this week that you're close to signing this legally binding deal to fix unsafe buildings. So when do you hope it's going to be signed, and how much could it cost the industry?
Well, we're going to publish it tomorrow, and we are going to give every developer a sort of window of 6 weeks during which we hope they will sign. Some have already indicated that they will. I mean, I don't want to preempt, there's been a bit of speculation about some of the developers who will, but all the indications are that the overwhelming majority will, and those who don't will face consequences if they don't sign the contract. We'll make sure that, in effect, they won't be able to build anything more in the future. We think it will be in the realm of billions that we will be able to unlock in order to deal with this crisis.
In the region of 5 billion, is that right?
Yes.
I just want to talk. You say that there have been well-intentioned efforts before.
Yes.
At the same time, Grenfell happened 6 years ago. We all remember, the horrific images of those people trapped inside the building, and only 7% of 368,000 dangerous flats have been fixed.
Yes.
It's not good enough. I mean, the intentions might be good, but that's not going to happen.
No, I completely agree. I am the first, I hope, to acknowledge that we haven't done right by the bereaved and the residents and the survivors in Grenfell, and that is one very, very important mission. But it's also the case that there have been people who have been effectively imprisoned in their own flats for too long. As we know, after Grenfell, there were hundreds of buildings that were identified as having similar faults to Grenfell, not identical, but similar. We knew that all of the people who were in those buildings, not only were they not safe, but it was also the case, entirely understandably, that they couldn't move because they couldn't sell their flat, they couldn't get a mortgage. From an economic point of view, the market was frozen, but from a human point of view, far more importantly, people's lives were completely disrupted. So, again, I have and always will apologise to people for the fact that it's taken this long to sort. But now we have got progress.
Do you also take some responsibility on behalf of the government for what happened at Grenfell?
I think that if you look at what happened at Grenfell, there were lots of factors. But yes, government collectively has to take some responsibility. Now, I think that the responsibility extends before the Conservatives came into government in 2010. And I'm not about attributing blame to individuals. I think that's wrong, because there are a lot of us who have a responsibility to say that the system of regulation that was in place was ambiguous and it was exploited by people who were putting profit before lives. And again, you know, there is, I think, and I hope this doesn't seem as though I'm dodging responsibility, I don't want to at all. I think there's a difference between presiding over a system that's negligent and actively exploiting it. But it is undeniably the case that the system of building regulation was not right.
Would you apologise to those families?
I absolutely would. And again, I've had the chance to talk to many of the families most directly affected since doing this job. I brought up my children just quite close to Grenfell, and I remember visiting the site just a couple of days after the fire and thinking that it was horrific that this had happened. The more that I discovered about the circumstances there, the more horrified I was. There were people in that building who had warned beforehand that they were in potential danger. Their warnings were not heeded. And the inquiry which followed, and Theresa May was absolutely right to set it up, because it's shone a light on terrible practice. It exposed the fact that there were a variety of different people, from the people who manufactured the cladding to the people who applied it, who just didn't do the right thing.
I have one more question on housing before we move on to other issues. Someone who, shall we say, has experience of the peculiarities of the leasehold system. I was quite struck by your interview with the Sunday Times where you said you wanted to abolish it.
Yes.
Are you hoping for that to happen before the election?
Yes. We want to introduce legislation in the final parliamentary session, so later this calendar year, in order to change the leasehold system. It's not easy in legal terms because, when you've got a tangle of property laws going back hundreds of years, unstitching all of that is difficult. But the fundamental thing is that leasehold is just it's an unfair form of property ownership. In crude terms, if you buy a flat, that should be yours. You shouldn't be on the hook for charges which managing agents and other people can land you with, which are, gouging.
Another story that I'm keen to find out more about this morning is, given the state of the ambulance waiting times, is that tomorrow you're announcing a plan to treat 500,000 patients in what you're calling hospitals at home.
Yes.
What's that idea?
Well, the principle there is to make sure that we can provide people with the quality of care that they might enjoy in hospital in their home. And there are at least three benefits from that. The first is that there are many people, I know personally, who would rather have a relative at home if they're ill, and if they can get the care required, and this comes to the second point, if you can make sure that there are visits by nurses or by other clinical professionals who can make sure that someone is comfortable and looked after effectively, then the third thing is that you can also free up capacity in hospitals themselves for the more acute cases that require more specific intervention.
Let's, get to the nub of what this is, right? Hospitals at home, it's not really a hospital, it's your home, right? It feels like quite a nice kind of way of putting it, but you're effectively being treated at home because our hospitals are full.
Yes.
The average ambulance wait time for a heart attack, 93 minutes in December. 55,000 people waiting on trolleys for more than 12 hours in A&E. You're being forced to do this, and you have some nice phrase for it, hospitals at home, because there aren't enough beds. Well,
again, one of the reasons why we need to do it is that there are people who are in hospital who need care, but who can be cared for effectively at home. Again, in hospitals, we all know, there are intensive care units. There are other facilities that do require the individual to have the range of interventions that can only be delivered in hospital. But there are other things that can be done. There are drugs that can be administered. There are treatments that can be monitored. And provided someone is safe and warm at home, then that care can be administered there. And again, when the Prime Minister organised a health summit a few weeks ago, one of the striking things that came out of that, and which many of us knew beforehand, was that if you can have the right bespoke package of care, then someone can be more comfortable and easily as well cared for as in hospital. But it depends on the type of patient, it depends on the type of condition.
Of course. Let's talk about the other Sunday on the front page of the Sunday Times, shall we? This is a story about Boris Johnson and his relationship with Richard Sharp, who is now, of course, the BBC chairman, and whether or not Richard Sharp helped to guarantee or find someone to guarantee an £800,000 loan. Well, according to the Sunday Times, Boris Johnson was formally told to stop asking Mr Sharp for advice about his affairs days before he was announced as the government's choice for BBC chairman. This is the letter, the advice from the Cabinet Office. According to the Sunday Times, given the imminent announcement of Richard Sharp as the new BBC chair, it's important that you no longer ask his advice about your personal financial matters. And I just want to compare that to what Boris Johnson told Sky News last week when he said, Richard Sharp knows absolutely nothing about my personal finances. I can tell you that for ding dang sure. I mean, how can that possibly be true?
Well, I think, again, I don't know about the conversations that we're carrying on. The only two things I would say. The one thing is that I know that, and I've seen it happen in the past, that there's a letter here, a note there, a comment there. It points towards one conclusion. Once you know all the evidence, actually, another conclusion can fairly be drawn.
At the same time, though, you know, if he was given a letter by the Simon Case, by the Cabinet Secretary, saying stop asking him for advice about your personal finances, he can't say, oh, he knew nothing about my personal finances for ding dang sure. I mean, these two things seem completely contradictory.
Well, again, I would say that I don't know all the details, and
you must recognise that as well.
No, I completely recognise how you can produce two pieces of evidence and a conclusion can be drawn, but I know...
It's hard to draw another conclusion.
Well, I know from experience in the past, including when I jumped to conclusions about people and then found that actually I'd been unfair on them, that we just need to see all the facts. And it is the case that the manner of Richard Sharp's appointment is being looked at by the Commissioner for Public Appointments just to make sure that everything was completely kosher. And so, again, you know, it's absolutely understandable to think, aha, this plus this equals that. But my bitter experience is wait until you see all the facts before coming to a definitive conclusion.
OK, we will wait to see the facts. Is Boris Johnson becoming a liability?
No. I think Boris Johnson was a very good Prime Minister, and I think that he has a lot to contribute to public life in the future. OK. Nadhim
Zahawi, another investigation going on, of course, into whether Nadhim Zahawi broke the ministerial code over his tax affairs. Can you tell us when we should expect that report? Is it next week?
I don't know. I know that Sir Laurie Magnus, who's the independent advisor on these issues, who's having a look at it, wants to conclude his investigation as quickly as possible. And I think, in fact, I know that Nadhim wants the investigation to be concluded as quickly as possible. So
have you spoken to him about it?
I know that Nadhim wants the thing done with. I haven't spoken to Laurie Magnus. I wouldn't. But I don't know. And again, I think it's in everyone's interests that the matter is concluded as quickly as possible, but it's also the case that, you know, when you've got someone specifically appointed to be independent, then me providing a running commentary on the timing and so on could be misconstrued.
Understood. If he's found to have broken the ministerial code, should he lose his job?
Well, again, it's a serious thing to break the ministerial code, but again, it's up to the Prime Minister in possession of the full facts. I know it's irritating when politicians say, oh, we've got to wait for the result of the inquiry. But once you've set it up, once you've got this independent person looking at all the evidence, I think trying to anticipate what he concludes and therefore what follows. Well, you know, I completely understand that. You know, it's
Mel Stride said it would be difficult. Mel Stride says it would be a difficult finding. You say it would be a serious thing. I mean, it would be difficult, wouldn't it?
Again, you know, I suspect that we'll find out soon enough, and then a judgment can be made on that basis.
Understood. Now, unsurprisingly, all of this, we've been talking about the NHS, we've been talking about the financial allegations that are being investigated, is having an impact on people's view of the Conservative Party. We had a surprise guest in calling into our NHS phone-in this week. I just want to play you what happened. This is Rod Stewart calling in to Sky News.
I personally have been a Tory for a long time, but I think this government should stand down now and give the Labour Party a go at it, because this is heartbreaking for the nurses. It really is heartbreaking. In all my years of living in this country, I've never seen it so bad.
I feel like he's articulating what a lot of your former voters are thinking.
Well, I grew up listening to Rod Stewart. I'm a huge fan of his. And all I would say is that The government is absolutely focused on solving the problems that Rod and others are worried about. We're absolutely focused on making sure that we can cut waiting lists. We're absolutely determined to ensure that we can halve inflation, that we can reduce debt, that we can grow the economy, and also that we can deal with the illegal immigration problems, stopping the boats in the Channel. Those priorities are absolutely essential to the government. And of course there are people like Sir Rod and others who are natural conservatives who have concerns at the moment. Our job is to convince them that on inflation, on growth, on reducing debt, on making sure that we cut waiting lists and stop the boats, that we are delivering.
You see, I don't think anyone would dispute that Rishi Sunak's had a difficult hand to play, right? He came off the back of Liz Truss's disastrous budget. We've had a backdrop of high inflation, the Conservatives in power for over a decade. But the polls are moving in the wrong direction. I think we can have a quick look. This is the kind of YouGov tracker poll, and you can see that there hasn't actually been a bounce. The polls are moving in the wrong direction. The gap is still wide. And if you look at the leader approval ratings as well, when you compare Rishi Sunak to Keir Starmer, you can see there, right at the end, Keir Starmer's red line is going up and Rishi Sunak's is dropping. If you're a Conservative MP, you're going to be looking at this, you're going to be really worried.
Well, again, polls are snapshots.
Well, this isn't a snapshot, this is over time.
No, polls... But
that's why I chose it, rather than a snapshot.
Evidence would suggest that over the course of the last few years, it's very difficult to say how politics is going to look in a year or in 18 months' time. So, again, the evidence there shows the volatility, actually, of public opinion in a variety of areas and the way in which reputations can rise and fall. But
it's not that volatile. There's been a very significant lead for the Labour Party for some time now.
And as there has been for opposition parties during periods when governments have been in power, during the middle of their term in office. The critical thing, though, is people want to see a government that is making an impact. All of us can be commentators and can be invited to offer a gloss on the polls. But the difference is that my job, my gloss on the polls is no better than anyone else's. My job is to deliver.
That's it, though, isn't it? You said that people want governments who are making an impact.
Yes.
You are a reformer, right? You go into departments, you're not worried about breaking a few eggs. You look at Rishi Sunak, you look at Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. Are they a bit timid?
No, God, no. No. I mean,
managerial.
No, well, the thing is that being an effective manager of public money and public services is not a sin, in my view. But it is the case that, first of all, we had to bring stability, and we have, and now we've set out areas where we are reforming. So Jeremy gave a fantastic speech on Friday in which he explained how it is that we can make the country essentially the technological powerhouse of the next century, how by improving education, having a culture of entrepreneurship, making sure that we get more people back into employment and making sure that we have investment everywhere across the country to level up, we can drive economic reform.
Let's talk about education, shall we? Teachers are striking next week. Are they right to?
Sorry?
Are they right to?
No. My own son's school is going to be affected by this. I do sympathise with the position that many teachers are in, but I would ask them respectfully not to go on strike because I believe, as the education secretary, as Gillian Keegan has said, you don't need to go on strike to get her attention. She cares about improving our schools.
Because that's the whole point, isn't it? Teachers feel like it is the only way to get people's attention. If you look at the IFS, they say that most teachers will see a 5% real terms pay cut this year, and that's on the back of successive real terms pay cuts over the last decade. We've got a recruitment crisis in teaching. It's no surprise.
It's no comfort to anyone to point out how difficult economic circumstances are overall, and that is why it is so important, and it's our top priority to reduce inflation. That is the best tax cut, the best pay rise that anyone could have.
Well, the best pay rise that people could get is an actual pay rise.
That would only contribute to further inflation in the future. It would only create a spiral.
I thought it was a global inflation crisis. Now you're saying teachers are to blame for it.
No, I'm not saying that teachers are to blame for an inflation crisis. Not at all. But I am saying that all of us have a responsibility to recognise that when public money is tight, when we need to reduce inflation, when we need to get debt down, we also need to make sure that pay awards reflect that. On the recruitment issue in teaching as well, of course pay is a factor, but it's also the case that we need to support teachers by providing them with the right tools to have effective discipline and behaviour in the classroom. The other thing is that the overwhelming majority of teachers go into teaching because they're idealistic. They want to transform the opportunities of the next generation of children. So, again, making sure that we do the right thing in education overall by providing teachers with the tools to deliver the curriculum effectively is also important.
What would be a realistic pay rise, a fair pay rise for teachers?
Again, it's not for me to say, but I think the important thing is that the programme of conversations that teachers and teaching unions are having with the Education Secretary, which I know the Education Secretary is committed to, and she's a warm and open person, that is the best route to a conclusion.
Just finally, when you were Education Secretary, I remember there was a lot of talk about what was termed as the blob, people who were resistant to your reforms. Are these strikes an example of the blob in action?
No.
OK, thank you very much. Michael Gove, good to have you on the programme.
Thank you very much, Sophie, thank you.
My interview with Michael Gove there. Now, a medium-sized economy in a period of decline with poor productivity, or one of the world's richest countries with innovative industries waiting to be unleashed. Well, the Chancellor tells us it's the latter and wants an end to what he describes as declinism about the UK economy that he says is holding us back. But what is the view of business and how is the government managing it? Well, we can try and find out. Shevaun Haviland is Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. She joins us now. Thank you so much for being with us. Towards the end of the interview, I'm just kicking the desk. Towards the interview end of the interview there with the Levelling Up Secretary, I was trying to say, you know, is the government doing enough? Is it being thoughtful enough, or is it just trying to kind of steady the ship? And he said, no, it's all about big ideas, and he pointed to the Chancellor's speech this week. What's your take? Is the government taking enough risks?
So I was at the Chancellor's speech on Friday, and it was good to hear him being really positive about British business. In this role with the Chambers, I have the joy of travelling the country and meeting businesses all over our regions and nations. And, you know, we do have amazing, innovative, growing businesses. So we do need to be really positive about that. And it was a step in the right direction, but it is a framework. We're probably missing a couple of E's from his framework on export and energy. But what business really want to see is action and changes and policies to make a difference.
It felt like there was a lot of words and not that much in terms of policy. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, he did say that's what he was laying out. It's a step in the right direction for something that looks like a strategy. But what we really want to see is on areas like export, you know, that's a huge growth area for us as a country. We need to fix the Northern Ireland Protocol so we can trade more easily with our biggest trading partners. We need to see support for businesses on their energy bills. Of course, the support for businesses on energy was fantastic. It's been over the last 6 months, but it's coming to an end in March. We've got a new package. It's much, much lower than the last. And when I travel around the country, energy bills are really a concern for business. And of course, people, getting the right people to run their business.
You were talking there about exports and also about getting the protocol right, the Northern Ireland Protocol, the famous protocol. Do you think that the government is, I guess, reluctant to talk honestly about the impacts of Brexit for political reasons?
So, businesses that export are more resilient, they're stronger, they last longer, they pay better. It's incredibly important. And those who had been exporting to the EU have had huge issues over the last 2 years. I mean, I meet food and drink businesses who have just stopped exporting to the EU because it's too difficult. And that is the opposite of growth. So getting the Northern Ireland Protocol away is going to be really important to then going on to fixing the bits of the trade agreement that aren't working around VAT, around food and drink exports. I mean, they really, everywhere I go, they tell us that it's a significant problem. And that's not just export of goods, that's use of professional services, moving people around Europe, all of that.
Are you optimistic that the government could actually do something about it?
We're hearing positive things about Northern Ireland Protocol. I was with the EU ambassadors earlier this week. They're also feeling positive. So that's going to be a big thing if we can get past that.
That's interesting. Is there any sort of timescale that they're giving on it?
We're hoping for this quarter. We really need to see it this quarter because that way we can move on with the special committees and we can fix the bits that aren't working.
That's really interesting. Just staying on the Chancellor's speech, he railed against declinism. He was saying there's too much pessimism about the prospects of the UK economy. But, you know, in a way I kind of think we're the only G7 economy still smaller than before the pandemic. Inflation is higher here in comparison to other countries. We've talked about the trade hit that many businesses have seen. We're getting poorer. That's not declinism, that's reality, right?
when I meet businesses of the UK, they do lay out the challenges that we're facing and some of the fixes that we need on that. But business people are by their nature optimistic, they're forward-looking, they're positive. And Friday, after I saw the Chancellor, I went to Huntington. I met an amazing business that is in advanced materials, unique global IP, founded here, growing here, and that's what we want to talk up. That's what we want to see more of. But there are some issues that we need to fix. So everywhere I go, businesses say, I can't get the people I need to grow my business. So we want to see a bit more on that sort of skills development piece. There are some good things going on.
And on that, because there's been quite a focus on the over 50s, is that the right policy, or are they perhaps people who don't necessarily have the skills for the jobs that need filling?
It's part of the answer. It's part of the answer, and we're working with government on the economically inactive. The Chancellor talked about it on Friday. That might be people over 50 coming back into the workforce. But actually, we need to look at childcare so we can bring carers and parents back into the workforce. And honestly, we have 1.2 million open roles in this country. By the government's estimate, that's about 500,000 people. And when I go around the country, businesses always also tell us we need people from the rest of Europe to come in and work in this country. So we really want government to look at their shortage occupation lists, the structures that allow them to bring in short-term visas for people in areas like hospitality where they're really struggling.
We'll talk about childcare a bit later. It does feel as if it's a really important topic to talk about if you're talking about getting people back into the workplace, right? There's also a big debate in the Conservative Party about tax cuts. Now, the line from the Chancellor is that the best tax cut is getting inflation down. But do you think there is a role for tax cuts?
So it's good for consumers because they feel there's a bit more money in their pockets. So obviously, that's good for business. And businesses want to see taxes kept low at the front end so that they have enough cash to invest in their businesses. But actually what they really want to see is better access to people so they can grow their businesses, helping them with their energy bills. But also, you know, we have huge opportunities in green innovation, for example. So how are we supporting the green accelerators we've got across the country? How are we investing in infrastructure so we can build our SME supply chains? It's that sort of positive growth they want to see.
I just want to just go out a little bit and just talk a little bit about the state of the economy and put it into some context. We talked about some of the challenges, whether it's trade, whether it's inflation. Do you think it's harder for businesses now than it has been in previous years, you know, even during COVID or during the financial crash, or things a bit more optimistic?
If you'd asked me a year ago, where energy bills were really spiralling and we had businesses with 200, 300, 400% increases, they were saying to me, this is worse than COVID. But the energy package has really helped them with a little bit of forward view. We are now seeing inflation hopefully peaking, forecast to be 5% by the end of the year. Look, it's going to be a hard year. It's going to be a tricky year. But supporting businesses now isn't about subsidies or handouts. It's about investing in those businesses so they're sort of fit for the future to make the most of it as we come out of the difficult times.
It does feel like inflation is such a huge thing, whether it's from a business perspective, you know, you talk about the energy bills and at the worst being worse than the pandemic, but also, of course, for families, particularly thinking about food bills and stuff like that. A recent analysis in the Financial Times suggested that on present trends, the average Polish family will be richer than a British family by 2030, a Slovenian family in just 2024. I mean, is the UK now, you know, a poor country with just a wealthy pocket in London and the South East? Do we need to relook at, you know, the kind of economy we are?
We need to use the chamber network around the country, the structure we have in place to support local business. And remember, local businesses are people. They employ local people, they support their communities. You know, we saw that we had the Levelling Up Secretary earlier. I said to Michael, the Chamber Network has been doing levelling up for 250 years. So support local businesses, inject money into the system. Let's use those Solvency II changes that the Chancellor's been talking about to help support and grow local business, because that helps local people.
Really interesting. Thank you very much for being on the programme this morning. Well, let's get Labour's view now. The party's Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, joins us now live from central London. I'm keen to talk to you about a whole range of issues, including strikes, but just to pick up on something we were just talking about with Shevaun in the interview just there. She was saying that there's no point about talking about getting people back into the workplace without talking about childcare. And you want a guaranteed childcare, don't you, for all parents of children aged between 9 months to 11 years. How would that work?
Well, we have been listening to business and parents about what's holding them back and what's holding back our economy. And that does involve making sure that we've got a modern childcare system that reflects the needs of parents and children and how they live their lives today. So we are looking at how we fundamentally rethink how we deliver childcare in our country. So from the end of parental leave right through to the end of primary school. And the first step we've set out around that is making sure we deliver breakfast clubs for all primary school children in England, because it's important that we get the early years right, and we'll have more to say on that. But also parents know that their childcare problems don't end when their children start at school. And so many women, and sadly women in particular that I speak to, are giving up jobs they love or are cutting back on their hours because childcare just isn't there, and it's holding back our economy. If you're serious about growth, you've got to be serious about delivering a modern childcare system too.
You know what, I'm going to have to pivot very quickly because we've had some breaking news through, and you will understand when you hear what that news is. We've heard from the UK Prime Minister on Nadhim Zahawi, and if you remember, he's asked his ethics advisor to look into whether or not Nadhim Zahawi broke the ministerial code in relation to his tax affairs. He's put out a statement where he says it's clear that there has been a serious breach of the ministerial code. He says, as a result, I've informed you of my decision to remove you from your position in government. So that there is a letter from the Prime Minister to Nadhim Zahawi saying that he has been removing him from government. So he's effectively been sacked from the government because it is clear to the Prime Minister that there has been a breach of the ministerial code. I'm going to bring you the full letters just as soon as I can. But Bridget Phillipson, what's your immediate reaction to that?
Well, it's not clear to me what the Prime Minister has been waiting for. It's been as plain as day for weeks now that this was going to be the outcome, but because of Rishi Sunak's weakness, his weakness within his own party and his failure to put the country first as a result, it's taken a very long time to get here. It's just a shame it's taken him so long that our country continues to be sucked into this mire of sleaze that the Conservatives are delivering for us. And, you know, when Rishi Sunak first became Prime Minister, he promised us integrity and accountability. I think we're a very, very long way away from that.
Just to bring you a bit more details from the full letter that we have now got. This letter from the Prime Minister to Nadhim Zahawi, dated today. He says, when I became Prime Minister last year, I pledged that the government I lead would have integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. That is why, following new information which came to light in recent days regarding your personal financial arrangements and declarations, I asked the Lori Magnus, the independent advisor on ministers' interests, to fully investigate this matter. You agreed and undertook to cooperate fully with the inquiry. Following the completion of the independent advisor's investigation, the findings of which he has shared with us both, it is clear that there has been a serious breach of the ministerial code. As a result, I've informed you of my decision to remove you from your position in His Majesty's government. He goes on to say that Nadhim Zahawi should be extremely proud of his achievements over the 5 years, referencing the vaccine procurement programme in particular, and the fact that he is a Kurdish-born Iraqi refugee. That's something which people up and down this country have rightly valued, Rishi Sunak says in this letter. But just to summarise, it is clear this morning that the investigation has completed into Nadhim Zahawi. The findings have been shared with both the Prime Minister and Nadhim Zahawi himself. And as a result, the Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, says it's clear there has been a serious breach of the ministerial code, and as a result, he has been sacked from the government. Let's go back, shall we, to Bridget Phillipson. You say that it's taken the Prime Minister a long time to reach this conclusion. Has it? The investigation was finalised pretty quickly, and as soon as the results came in, he's gone.
He didn't need the advisor to tell him this, and it's just not clear to me why it's taken so long. But the sad truth is Nadhim Zahawi is one of a number of cases that we've seen in recent months in the Conservative Party. So I also look forward to the Prime Minister taking action against Dominic Raab, and I also look forward to the Prime Minister taking action against Suella Braverman, who herself was found to have broken the ministerial code. Rather than sack her, he invited her back into government. I mean, it is just a joke for the Prime Minister to suggest that somehow this is a government that has got integrity and accountability at its heart. They are riven with sleaze. They're just fighting it out constantly amongst themselves, and it's the British people who suffer as a result, because it's all about the Conservative Party and it's not about what's right for our country. We face really big challenges right now, but when you've got this constant infighting and when you've got a Prime Minister that is so weak he can't stand up for what's right, and he kind of outsources that judgment to others, I think it tells you everything you need to know about really why it is time for a change in Britain.
You say he's weak, but he has just sacked Nadhim Zahawi this morning after getting the evidence through. I guess those people...
I mean, he really hadn't... Oh, he had no choice but to sack him, but he should have sacked him weeks ago. I mean, it was always going to end in this way. So, you know, why on earth aren't we also seeing action on Suella Braverman and Dominic Raab and, you know, all the scandal that continues to envelop Boris Johnson? This is not just one bad apple. This is right at the heart of the Conservative Party, and it speaks to the Prime Minister's weakness and his weak position within his own party, that as a result he can't put the country first.
Do you think that there is an argument that some close to Rishi Sunak might make that he's effectively doing a clean-up job from administrations that have gone before him? He wasn't told the full facts by Nadhim Zahawi, he claims, and also, of course, the Boris Johnson allegations that you referred to. He would argue, I guess, that those are more of a hangover from the previous administration that he is now having to deal with the consequences of.
Well, he's not doing a very good job at cleaning it up if this is what he's claiming, because the stench of sleaze just hangs around the Conservative Party. You know, yes, Nadhim Zahawi, but so many of them. And I think it speaks to a wider problem that you've had a government that's been in charge now for 13 years, which is ample time to build a better Britain. And rather than focusing on what the British people want right now, they're just mired in this kind of infighting and constant, problems that they face within their own party. I think politics is about delivering for the British people. Right now with the Conservatives, that isn't what people are getting. An NHS on its knees, our schools, often many of them crumbling, terrible data that the government refuses to publish about the state of our schools, growth at a terrible level, and so many people held back. I think Britain's best days really do lie ahead of us, but I don't see how we get to that stronger and better position as a country with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, with the fundamental weakness right at the heart of his government.
At the same time, as we were talking before, Nadhim Zahawi has been sacked. You mentioned Dominic Raab. The allegations into him are being looked into. It is right that due process is followed in these very important matters, is it not?
Look, there is just so much here, of course, and, due process is followed in the Nadhim Zahawi case, and due process has resulted in what we all knew was going to happen in the first place. I think it speaks to the Prime Minister's character and his judgment that he hasn't been prepared to act until now. He doesn't need to wait for other people to tell him what to do. He's the Prime Minister, for goodness sake. He should just get on with it.
He says, just to recap, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has effectively sacked Nadhim Zahawi from government. He's asked him, he has said that he's decided to remove him from his position in the government because it is clear in his words that there's been a serious breach of the ministerial code, that the letter from Rishi Sunak to Nadhim Zahawi over his tax affairs. Do you think that with all of the scrutiny of this story, that politicians should have to publish their tax returns?
I think the trouble with all of this, and partly why I think in a bizarre kind of way it suits the government, is it makes all politicians look as bad as one another. And I think there is a real risk that it undermines faith in politics and the ability of, politicians to seek to make lives better for the people of our country and the people that we represent. I have no issue at all with the publication of tax returns when it comes to the Prime Minister and others. And Keir Starmer has set out today that he believes that the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Chancellor and their respective counterparts should publish their tax returns. I don't think that's particularly controversial. And, my own tax return, there's nothing particularly interesting for anybody to see. It seems to be the likes of Nadhim Zahawi and others that have got something that they're wanting to hide.
So you'd be happy to publish your own tax return. I guess the other argument for some is that it might mean that people who have been in business or are wealthy people maybe put off entering Parliament.
I think if you're paying your taxes, you've got nothing to worry about. The trouble is we've had people at the heart of government, including those responsible for running our tax system, who haven't been doing what's expected of them. That's the trouble. But I think it's reasonable. In fact, I think it's a basic expectation of those in government that they should be following the rules that they set for others.
I have to say, one thing that I have found quite interesting from the letter is the very clear implication that Rishi Sunak has sacked Nadhim Zahawi. He hasn't allowed him the space to write his own letter of resignation or to leave on his terms. I mean, do you think this is Rishi Sunak trying to take charge of the situation?
I think he's desperately scrabbling around after weeks of failing to act. It was always going to come to this. We had this ludicrous spectacle at Prime Minister's Questions this week where Rishi Sunak was defending Nadhim Zahawi in effect. That was never going to be a tenable position for the Prime Minister. I think he's just underlined his own weakness within his party, that it's taken him so long to get to this point.
Now, we are going to stay on this story for the rest of the programme. We're talking to Sam Coates in just a minute, but I do just want to squeeze in one final question on the education strikes next week, because I know lots of parents watching this programme are going to be interested to know your answer on it. Schools are facing rolling strikes from this week. Are teachers right to walk out?
Well, like all parents, I don't want these strikes to go ahead. Of course, they will be disruptive, and I don't want children to miss time in school. But the reason that they're happening is because government ministers are refusing to negotiate seriously and find a settlement. There's still time for these strikes to be called off if government ministers are serious about getting around the table and trying to find a way through it. But parents will also know that teachers increasingly feel undervalued and underappreciated for the brilliant work that they do. That's what they tell me when I'm out speaking with teachers and school leaders. And over the last decade, we've had a government that hasn't taken education seriously as a priority for our country, and that's reflected in the fact that teachers have had real terms pay cuts. And unsurprisingly, given the wider pressures that we're seeing right now in the economy, they've come to the end of the road. So my strong advice to ministers would be the way that these strikes are to be called off is for serious and proper negotiation, and there is still time. So let's make it happen and let's get to a position that everyone can live with. But right now, we've had 5 education secretaries in the last year, a total lack of seriousness in dealing with an issue that's been on the horizon since the summer. So we do need to get progress around this, but it falls to ministers, and at the minute they're just blaming others for their own failure to act.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Bridget Phillipson, a rather different interview this morning, I'm sure, than the one you were expecting to have. Good to talk.
Thank you.
Well, just to recap on the breaking news that we have had in the last few minutes, the Prime Minister has sacked Nadhim Zahawi as party chairman. This is after a report by his ethics advisor into Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs. He says in the letter, following new information which came to light in recent days regarding your personal financial arrangements and declarations, I asked Sir Laurie Magnus, the independent advisor on ministers' interests, to fully investigate this matter. You agreed. And then he says, following the completion of the investigation, it is clear that there has been a serious breach of the ministerial code. As a result, I have informed you of my decision to remove you from your position in His Majesty's government. Well, let's get some analysis on this story, shall we? We can talk now to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who's with us this morning. Sam, do you think there's a sense of inevitability to this?
There was, Sophie, but it has taken 8 days since Nadhim Zahawi issued a statement defending himself, a 7-day investigation in order to come to the conclusion that Rishi Sunak has made this morning that Nadhim Zahawi is out of his government. Now, it's extraordinary, really, that just a year ago or so, Nadhim Zahawi was contemplating trying to become Prime Minister of this country. Yet what had already happened with his tax affairs ended up essentially sowing the seeds for his dismissal, for it's a blunt dismissal. It doesn't look like there was an opportunity given to Nadhim Zahawi to resign. His dismissal from government. Now he is out. One time, quite popular minister. He was been campaigning for his job over the last 7 days or so. He was in checkers with the Prime Minister just a few days ago. He's been leaning on colleagues to back him. His aides have been making the case to keep him in government. But no. This morning, Rishi Sunak makes clear he has decided that Nadhim Zahawi is out, and out in a pretty brutal fashion. But we've got more information for you, Sophie, because we know why in quite a lot of detail. Because in addition to the letter that Downing Street has released from the Prime Minister to Nadhim Zahawi dismissing him, we also have the letter. It's a 4-page letter from Sir Lori Magnus to the Prime Minister outlining why Nadhim Zahawi couldn't remain in government. And I have to say, Sophie, it's one of the most detailed and unsparing assessment that I can remember from an independent ministerial advisor on ethics about a serving cabinet minister, and makes absolutely clear in pitiless detail why Nadhim Zahawi could not stay in his job. I've got the letter in front of me. Let me just run you through some of the key points that it makes. Essentially, the conclusion that the independent ministerial advisor has got to is that all the period through 2021 and 2022, when HMRC was investigating Nadhim Zahawi's case, is that he didn't realise that he was the subject of a formal investigation and therefore didn't tell any of the relevant people that he should have done, like permanent secretaries in the Education Department, the permanent secretary when he became Chancellor, which oversees HMRC. Nadhim Zahawi didn't admit to them that he was under investigation by HMRC, Lori Magnus has found. And he claims, Nadhim Zahawi claims, that that's because whilst he was aware of a few inquiries, he didn't think that that amounted to be under investigation. And basically Lori Magnus just says that's nonsense. He says that impression that ministers are expected to understand what that means, and I consider, this is Lori Magnus writing, I consider that an HMRC investigation of the nature faced by Mr Zahawi would be a relevant matter for a minister to discuss and declare as part of their declaration of interest, and it's the kind of thing that you should speak to your permanent secretary, the most senior civil servant in your department, about. And it's that failure to tell the Education Permanent Secretary and the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury. Basically he is fairly unimpressed with Nadhim Zahawi suggesting that he didn't think that he was personally under investigation. He goes on to criticise the public statements of Nadhim Zahawi. Nadhim Zahawi saying in public that it is people have falsely claimed that the Serious Fraud Office, the National Crime Agency and HMRC are looking into me. Let me be clear, I am not aware of this. I haven't been not told of this. Now, Nadhim Zahawi told Lori Magnus that he made that statement because he was under the impression that he was answering HMRC's queries but was not under investigation. But Lori Magnus said that he considers an individual subject to the HMRC process faced by Mr Zahawi should have understood that he was under investigation by HMRC and that this was a serious matter. Incredible. Mr Zahawi's case for the defence was that even though HMRC are asking me questions, I didn't realise that that amounted to an investigation. And Lori Magnus, the investment banker who's been appointed Rishi Sunak's independent ethics advice, just went, well, I don't believe that in the slightest. Clearly, you should have known that that amounted to an investigation, and you should not have made those public statements. You should not have failed to declare it to the permanent secretaries in your department. And that's why I think that credibility gap that I think Lori Magnus feels that he's found between Nadhim Zahawi's public statement, his statements inside government, and what was really going on, because Lori Magnus has been able to talk to HMRC about the long-running investigation. He doesn't say how big the payment was that Nadhim Zahawi had to pay back to HMRC. He doesn't say, indeed, whether there was a penalty, although we believe that there was, as HMRC say that they, as HMRC found what Nadhim Zahawi characterises as carelessness, but there was a penalty to pay for that. So he doesn't go into the private tax affairs of this, but Lori Magnus does basically say, because you made those statements internally in government and to the public, which I don't think really match with the facts, you've got to go. Now, Sophie, there's a really big and important political point here, because a lot of people for the last couple of weeks have been asking, why did Rishi Sunak appoint Nadhim Zahawi in the first place, given that there were lots of stories in the media about Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs? Why didn't he just ask what was going on? Now, Downing Street have been absolutely clear that there were no flags, there were no warnings from civil servants that there was a problem with Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs because the matter had been settled. It was concluded before Rishi Sunak came along. But there has been this issue still persisting. Why didn't Rishi Sunak basically ask more questions? Why didn't the Cabinet Secretary perhaps tell Rishi Sunak that there was this big, fairly recent issue that Nadhim Zahawi had to deal with? And what this letter does, what this 4-page letter from the independent ministerial advisor to Rishi Sunak does, is sort of give a different reason for sacking him, basically saying that there's things that Rishi Sunak couldn't have known that make Nadhim Zahawi's position in government all but untenable. These public statements about how he wasn't under investigation by HMRC when he was, something that Lori Magnus says he can only have found out by talking to HMRC, not something that Rishi Sunak was particularly in a position to do when he was appointing jobs in his first cabinet back in the autumn, and basically says only by doing my investigation and talking to the permanent secretaries who weren't told of this investigation while it was going on, including the permanent secretary of the Treasury then, Tom Scholar, who of course was overseeing with Nadhim Zahawi HMRC. So, I mean, it is just extraordinary. Nadhim Zahawi involved in discussions with the taxman and being Chancellor overseeing HMRC, which does these negotiations, all of that happening at the same time. But essentially what Lori Magnus has done, as well as giving an unsparing account of why Nadhim Zahawi can't keep his job, is also, to some degree, providing cover, a shield for Rishi Sunak, exculpating the Prime Minister from not asking enough questions, saying it was only because I know these other things that were not in the public domain, that were not the subject of public disclosure, because of my essentially 6-day, 7-day investigation, that we've uncovered the real reasons why you should get rid of him. So some attempt at shielding the Prime Minister from the fallout. But it's a brutal letter, the one from the independent ministerial advisor, Sophie. It just is. It concludes that my overall judgment is that Mr Zahawi's conduct as a minister has fallen below the high standards that of Prime Minister you rightly expect from those who serve in your government. The one thing that Lori Magnus does say is that Nadhim Zahawi fully cooperated. I think he felt he had a case to make, that he didn't know he was under full investigation. He didn't realise that these things were a problem. But as you've been hearing, Lori Magnus dismisses out of the water the idea that Nadhim Zahawi could be going around saying he wasn't under investigation, failing to tell permanent secretaries that he had been or was under investigation, all because the questions, in Nadhim Zahawi's view, as he told the ministerial advisor, didn't amount to a proper formal probe. Nonsense, basically, is what Lori Magnus says, and that's why this morning Nadhim Zahawi is no longer part of the government, no longer Conservative Party chairman, and there's a reshuffle underway.
Extraordinary. As you say, Sam, an unsparing letter there by Sir Lori Magnus, leading to Rishi Sunak dismissing Nadhim Zahawi, not given the right to resign himself. Sam, we're going to come back to you. Don't go anywhere, because we're going to have lots more coverage of this as the morning rolls on. But we can get some further reaction now from the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Thanks for being on the programme. A bit of a different interview to the one we're expecting. What is your reaction to the sacking of Nadhim Zahawi?
Well, my kind of first reaction, Sophie, is that the government really must learn lessons from this situation. This conclusion has felt inevitable, hasn't it, for a long time, and yet it's been allowed to dominate pretty much most of January, when there is probably the worst crisis in the National Health Service that I can remember, and also we've got collapsing public transport around the country. People can't get to work, and attention should have been on those issues, absolutely those issues, because they're critical for millions of people, and yet the airwaves have been taken up with this. And the government has to learn a lesson from this. This should have been dealt with much more quickly. Mr Zahawi should have been asked to step aside even from his role before the conclusions of this inquiry, because it shouldn't have been allowed to dominate in this way. And as we can see, it's not just this now. There are other investigations ongoing as well. So they must learn lessons from this and get government focus where it needs to be on the very serious situation that there is out there for millions of people struggling with the cost of living crisis, ambulances queuing outside of hospitals, train timetables that are just non-existent in large parts of the country. Those are the things that the British public urgently need their government to focus on.
There's been a lot of pressure on Rishi Sunak over this, not least because his first speech as Prime Minister, he pledged to lead a government of integrity, professionalism and accountability. Is there an argument that by sacking Nadhim Zahawi in this way, as soon as he got the conclusions of the report, not allowing him the right to resign himself, he is showing strength on the issue?
Well, no, I think the mistake that he made I've already pointed to, which is he should have asked Mr Zahawi temporarily to step aside from his role while this investigation was going on, so that it wouldn't dominate in the way that it has done, and that was not done. And that's why I say the government does need to look at the way it's handled this and do things very differently. It's become a bit of a hallmark of this government, hasn't it, where we've had the bullying allegations against ministers just rumbling away all of the time. And the problem with that is it takes sort of much needed oxygen away from the issues that need to be debated. And this is one of the things that frustrates people about Westminster. It will obsess on something like this, but it will largely ignore the fact that the timetable on the main railway line in this country that links the main cities of this country collapsed yesterday. Thousands and thousands of people had their weekend plans literally torn up by Avanti West Coast. And yet where is that? Who is debating that? Who is speaking up for those people in the media? Well, I'm trying to, and I came on today to try and do that for them, and yet we're talking about this, a kind of a Westminster concocted mess, basically, which they should have dealt with much earlier, and that, I think, brings out a lot of what's wrong with this country at the moment, and a lot of what is really frustrating people. People are genuinely struggling to get to work, to live their lives, to pay the bills, and they don't see that fully reflected in what's going on in Westminster and what is then debated in the media.
I can feel your frustration at not being able to talk enough in this interview about trains, buses, and the area that you represent. You'll forgive me because this is quite a big breaking story that we weren't expecting on a Sunday morning.
But shouldn't you go with that? Because is it right that we obsess on this? The Prime Minister's made his decision. He made it too late. But should we now go on to what's going on in the National Health Service and on the railways? I don't know. I mean, I think this is the problem. And we repeatedly get ourselves into these Westminster dramas that actually take attention away from the things that most people are really, really frustrated about.
So would you like then a line to be drawn under this now? For Labour to stop, attacking the Prime Minister for it, for people to say, look, the decision's been made, let's move on, let's talk about other things?
No, I think it should do two other things today. I think it should deal with the Dominic Raab situation in the way that I've described. That isn't going away.
Well, that investigation is ongoing. It's important to hear everyone who wants to give evidence, right?
Exactly, but when ministers are subject to serious investigations like that, I think they should temporarily step aside from their roles. The Boris Johnson situation needs to be dealt with. Questions need clearing up. But by failing to do that, they then dominate. And that's the issue that I'm kind of raising, I guess, here. From our perspective, we're trying to keep public transport going. We're trying to support colleagues in the NHS. We're trying to resolve some of the disputes out there in the fire service, and yet those things are much bigger than this, but they are going really sometimes unreported. I often see people saying that on social media. Who is speaking about the fact that I can't get a train to London today and my life has been completely turned upside down? And I don't know, I just think we're living in very strange times where the disconnect between what's going on in Westminster and the rest of the country is getting bigger and bigger. People are getting more and more frustrated about it, and the government really needs to hear that, and it needs to sort of deal quickly with these things and put them to one side and get the focus back on where it should be. I'd love to know how much time has been taken up in Downing Street and Whitehall this week dealing with this situation. I bet they've spent more time on this than they have on the other things that I've mentioned.
You talked a lot about trains. I would like to talk to you about strikes as well while we have you. Of course, teachers walking out on rolling strikes from next week. Do you support them?
I do support people who have struggled to pay their bills. You know, you can't say it's wrong for someone who's had real terms pay cuts for years and then finds themselves in a cost of living crisis to try and protect themselves. What I would say is it should never come to this. What happened to getting around the negotiating table and sorting things out? That's how things used to be done, and it's how things should be done. Always in these situations, it's never the case that one side should get everything that they want and the other side's completely wrong. There's always a negotiation to be had. And what I've observed at the moment, there's a sort of culture of letting issues rumble on and playing the politics of the situation, trying to turn the public against the nurses or against the teachers or against the paramedics and the firefighters, rather than actually sitting down and solving things. You know, these problems on the railways, Sophie, they are entirely fixable. They could be fixed tomorrow, and yet they are allowed just to rumble on and rumble on. And that's what I mean about government really starting to get a grip and focusing on things that matter to people and not allowing just these multiple disputes to continue. You can't blame people who've had real terms pay cuts for years, who then find themselves in a cost of living crisis. You can't just expect them to keep going to work and sit there as their problems at home mount up. How can they kind of give all of their attention to our kids in the classroom if they're worried about what's going on with their rent and their ability to keep their home? I mean, it's just basic, isn't it? You've got to help people in a time like this. You've got to talk to people. And I, as a minister, I'm not just saying this sort of like, you know, so I wouldn't do it myself. I do it myself. I am talking to our firefighters. We are trying to resolve issues here. You know, we used to have a culture of that in this country, didn't we? It used to be called beer and sandwiches and smoke-filled rooms and all of that. What's happened to fixing things, negotiating and getting the country functioning again? It seems somehow that's out of fashion, and it really shouldn't be.
OK, thanks so much for being on the programme, Mr Burnham. I promise that we're going to invite you on again sometime soon to talk about some of the issues that I know we were planning on doing this morning.
Trains and buses next time.
Yeah, we will do more questions on trains
Sophie.
and buses. That's a promise. Andy Burnham, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, the breaking news this morning, if you are just joining us, the Prime Minister has sacked Nadhim Zahawi, the party chairman, after the conclusions of a report by his ethics advisor into Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs, concluded that he has, in the words of Sir Lorraine Magnus, his conduct as a minister has fallen below the high standards that, as Prime Minister, you rightly expect from those who serve in your government, effectively concluding that Mr Zahawi did not tell people that he was under investigation by HMRC when he should have done so. Rishi Sunak saying that, as a result, he has taken a decision to remove Nadhim Zahawi from his position in the government. And the findings, he says, it's clear that there has been a serious breach of the ministerial code. Well, I did speak to Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, just moments before the report was published. I would quite like to play you some of that interview because I did ask Mr Gove at the time when we could expect the report from Sir Lorraine Magnus. See what you think of his answer.
Wants to conclude his investigation as quickly as possible. And I think, in fact, I know that Nadhim wants the investigation to be concluded as quickly as possible. So
have you spoken to him about it?
I know that Nadhim wants the thing done with. I haven't spoken to Lorraine Magnus. I wouldn't. But I don't know. And again, I think it's in everyone's interests that the matter is concluded as quickly as possible. But it's also the case that, you know, when you've got someone specifically appointed to be independent, then me providing a running commentary on the timing and so on could be misconstrued.
Understood. Well, given, of course, that report was published, I think, less than an hour after Michael Gove said that, I think as soon as possible was doing quite a lot of work in that interview. Well, we can go straight back to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, now for some more reaction to the news that Nadhim Zahawi has been sacked. I've just been looking at the letter from Rishi Sunak. He starts off by saying, when I became Prime Minister last year, I pledged the government I lead would have integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. How important is it politically for Rishi Sunak to be seen to be dealing with this decisively?
Well, I think you can tell from the language of Rishi Sunak's letter that he realises he has to be seen to be as brutal as possible right now about Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs, partly because the scale of the mess that this affair has left him in as well, of course, as Nadhim Zahawi, who this morning is out of government. And it's precisely because Rishi Sunak came into government making out that he was a clean break from the past as the kind of government that Boris Johnson ran, with all of the conduct issues and conflict of interest issues that existed in the Boris Johnson regime. Rishi Sunak came in going, I'm going to be different. Yet here we are. This is the second cabinet minister that has had to resign under Rishi Sunak. Gavin Williamson left post last year over exchanges with different Conservative MPs that basically he felt didn't live up to standards in public life that you need to espouse. Now you've got Nadhim Zahawi out, and Rishi Sunak trying to be as brutal as possible. And you can see on your screen the strapline there, Nadhim Zahawi removed from government, because that's the language in the letter from Rishi Sunak. Not, I've given you an opportunity to resign. It's not, we discussed the issue and you agreed to vacate your post. It's, I've removed you, because Rishi Sunak rather urgently needs to look like he's back in the driving seat of this affair, because it's Rishi Sunak who's had quite a lot of questions about why this affair has been allowed to drag on so long, about why, if the issue was in the media before Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, he nevertheless appointed him, and why it's taken all so long. So I think this is Rishi Sunak trying to act, and he's helped in that, Sophie, by the report that we've had, the 4-page report that's also been released by the independent ministerial advisor Laurie Magnus, only a recent appointee to the job, an investment banker who's taken up the perhaps rather thankless task of investigating what's going on when people do wrong in Rishi Sunak's government. And in that rather unsparing report, he sets out why Nadhim Zahawi has had to be sacked this morning. And really, there are a couple of reasons for it, but it's not, Laurie Magnus does not conclude that Nadhim Zahawi had to go because he was in dispute with the taxman, because he ended up having to pay back a lot of tax, and because that ended up generating a fine. That's not the reason this morning that the independent ministerial advisor says that Nadhim Zahawi is out. Instead, the reason, the serious breach of the ministerial code that's led to the sacking is something rather different. It is that Nadhim Zahawi maintained all the way through the period that he was Education Secretary, and part of the time that he was Chancellor, where his job also included being in charge of HMNC. All the way through that, Nadhim Zahawi maintained internally and externally, so to his permanent secretaries and to the public, that he was not under investigation by HMRC when he was. That's the nub of the 4-page letter from the independent ministerial investigator. Because Nadhim Zahawi didn't come clean to his permanent secretary at the Treasury, come clean to the permanent secretary at the Department for Education about that investigation. That's the reason, the primary reason that Nadhim Zahawi is this morning out after the ministerial advisor concluded that he hadn't lived up to the high standards of the ministerial code. And in doing so, actually Laurie Magnus affords a little bit of cover for Rishi Sunak. Obviously, one of Number 10's priorities will make sure that although this episode is undoubtedly awful for the government, second cabinet minister to resign in a matter of months under the Prime Minister that promised to restore integrity and professionalism to public life. They want to shield Rishi Sunak from as much of the blowback, as much of the fallout as possible, basically by saying, well, it wasn't, he's going this morning not because of things that Rishi Sunak could have known, but because of things that Nadhim Zahawi failed to declare before Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. So in some way looking to shield Rishi Sunak there. But it's still absolutely brutal, and it suggests that Rishi Sunak continues to have to, as it were, deal with the consequences of the Boris Johnson regime. But I think there's almost a bit of a sense of self-pity inside Downing Street, that they're just having to continually trying to mop up lots of things that took place before Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. There was the Liz Truss era, and then, of course, since 2019, the Boris Johnson era. They can't get on the front foot, this government, and haven't really been able to since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister because of all of these issues. Michael Gove trying in the interview with you to point out some massive things that this government is going to attempt to do, whether it's admitting liability of government ministers about Grenfell, trying to sort that out by signing a series of contracts with the private sector in order to deal with issues around cladding, whether it's tackling the strikes, trying to take the public on side given those train strikes and school strikes, given that it's an attempt to sort out the Northern Ireland Protocol. There's a huge long list that government ministers would like to talk about. Rishi Sunak's claim to trying to win the next election is all based on being the competent Prime Minister who isn't like his predecessors, who does do deals and sort problems out. And yet there are just more problems exploding on his plate because of the nature, in part because of the nature of the cabinet that Rishi Sunak felt he had to appoint when he came into office. There's no doubt that at that moment in late October, early November, the man you can see on screen, Nadhim Zahawi, was put in the cabinet as part of a complicated reshuffle because the Conservative Party was essentially broken, and Nadhim Zahawi was part of trying to stitch together all the different factions because Rishi Sunak ultimately didn't feel that strong on the day that he entered Number 10, entered the building that you can see on your screen. He was trying to appease factions, glue the Conservative Party back together, and in doing so was taking in many of the people who had been part of Boris Johnson and part of Liz Truss's team. But many of those people, it's turning out, having some issues, whether it was Gavin Williamson, who was in and is now out, whether it's Nadhim Zahawi, who this morning has been fired. Questions also about no less than the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab. Could he be the next Cabinet Minister in the firing line because of questions about how he's behaved to staff? Some suggestions of maybe double-digit numbers of complaints about his behaviour while he has been a minister. These ongoing issues from months and years past still disrupting Rishi Sunak's government. So, yes, your question was, does Rishi Sunak have to look brutal? Yes, he does, because he's trying to draw a line under stuff, but it's really, really hard because there's just an awful lot of stuff, given the number of years the Conservatives have been in government, the nature of the cabinet that Rishi Sunak had to appoint, taking in so many people from the Boris Johnson era and the Liz Truss era, perhaps some hint that they're not necessarily all the team that he was picked if he wasn't dealing with the inheritance that he had, because he had to glue back together the Conservative Party. And now all of these things exploding on his plate are stopping his government getting the kind of momentum that his cabinet heard only this week at an away day in Chequers is needed to try and convince the public that this government is one that deals with the priorities that the public has, sorts out problems, and is on those sides. So difficult when, again, we're talking about the tax affairs and the failure to come clean of a senior cabinet minister who this morning is out of the government because of issues that have been around for the best part of a year. Very, very difficult for Rishi Sunak, but an effort underway to try and protect him the best that they can in Number 10 by saying that the reason that he's gone is failure to come clean before Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. That's why Nadhim Zahawi is out this morning.
Yeah, we'll have to find out, as you say, Sam, whether or not that will be adequate to draw a line under this matter when it comes to the reputation of Rishi Sunak. We'll be coming back to you shortly, Sam. Thank you, as always, for your analysis. Well, Sam Coates there saying that Rishi Sunak needs to show he was brutal in dealing with Nadhim Zahawi, not allowing him the opportunity to resign, instead making it pretty clear he was sacked. He says, I've informed you in the letter to Mr Zahawi of my decision to remove you from your position in His Majesty's government. Well, if the Prime Minister is trying to look brutal, brutal is also the word to describe the conclusions of this report by Sir Laurie Magnus, who is the new ethics advisor to the Prime Minister. I just want to bring you a bit of what he says in that report. I consider that Mr Zahawi, in holding the high privilege of being a Minister of the Crown, has shown insufficient regard for the general principles of the Ministerial Code. Mr Zahawi's conduct as a minister has fallen below the high standards that, as Prime Minister, you rightly expect from those who serve in your government. Goes on to say, given the nature of the investigation by HMRC, which started prior to his appointment as Secretary of State for Education on the 15th of September 2021, I consider that by failing to declare HMRC's ongoing investigation before July 2022, despite the ministerial declaration of interest form, including the specific prompts on tax affairs and HMRC, Mr Zahawi failed to meet the requirement to declare any interests which might be thought to give rise to a conflict. So that key there, effectively saying that Nadhim Zahawi did not tell the relevant people that he was under investigation by HMRC and, as a result, fell below the standards expected by the Prime Minister. So that was the conclusions of the report by Sir Laurie. We can also bring you the letter that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, sent to Nadhim Zahawi this morning and has made public as well. In the letter, he says, "When I became Prime Minister last year, I pledged that the government I lead would have integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level." He goes on to say, following the completion of the independent advisor's investigation, the findings of which he has shared with us both, it's clear there has been a serious breach of the ministerial code. As a result, I've informed you of my decision to remove you from your position in His Majesty's government. So that letter there from Rishi Sunak to Nadhim Zahawi, saying that he effectively is being sacked for failing to declare his interests, and he says there has been a serious breach of the ministerial code. Well, it's been a bit of a different programme for us this morning. Labour Shadow Education Secretary was probably expecting to talk more about the teaching strikes. Instead, she was asked for her reaction to the breaking news today. Let's listen.
It's not clear to me what the Prime Minister has been waiting for. It's been as plain as day for weeks now that this was going to be the outcome, but because of Rishi Sunak's weakness, his weakness within his own party and his failure to put the country first as a result, it's taken a very long time to get here. It's just a shame it's taken him so long that our country continues to be sucked into this mire of sleaze that the Conservatives are delivering for us. And, you know, when Rishi Sunak first became Prime Minister, he promised us integrity and accountability. I think we're a very, very long way away from that.
Well, that was Labour's reaction. We have had some fresh reaction from Michael Gove. When I spoke to him earlier this morning, he was pretty cagey, shall we say, about the fact that this explosive report was about to hit our inboxes less than an hour after our interview. But we have managed to catch up with him. Let's have a listen.
Completed, the Prime Minister regretfully but clearly decided that it was a moment for Nadhim to go.
It took a week for this to happen. We knew what the situation was a week ago, and yet it seems as though Rishi Sunak has allowed Nadhim Zahawi to drag his reputation and the government's reputation through the mud. Why has it taken so long for him to sack him?
I think it's important in all of these situations, whenever allegations are made, that they are investigated impartially, independently and in full. And that's what the Prime Minister wanted to see. That is what has happened. We recognise that whenever allegations are made, particularly serious allegations, they require proper investigation. We don't want a precipitate rush to judgment, but we do, once all the facts are laid out, need decisive action, and that is what the Prime Minister has given today, decisive action, but only after a full and proper investigation. Due process, then effective decision-making.
The Prime Minister promised that his government would be one of integrity. The first 100 days, sacked 2 ministers, another one under investigation. This isn't integrity, is it?
Yeah, integrity is about doing the right thing, and doing the right thing is making sure that when allegations come up like this, that you have a proper investigation. And then once the facts are fully established, then you make that judgment. People are innocent until proven guilty or otherwise. So therefore, it is absolutely vital that you follow the rules, and the Prime Minister is absolutely determined to ensure that he runs the government on the basis of professionalism and integrity, and that's what we've seen here, a professional independent advisor and a decision that reflects the integrity of the government.
But are you worried that your party now has the reputation, and your critics will say you're the party of sleaze?
Well, critics will always try to find a reason to attack the government. The most important thing for those of us in government is not to respond to commentary, but to get on with delivery. What we need to do is to make sure that our pledges to halve inflation, to reduce debt, to grow the economy, to stop the boats crossing the channel and to cut waiting lists are delivered.
And finally, on this topic, critics will also say that Rishi Sunak, his political judgment is weak. He hasn't got the strength required to make the tough political decisions when required, and that's been demonstrated this week, hasn't it?
Strength is there exhibited when you do the right thing. Strength is about standing by your principles, and the Prime Minister's principles are that you have a proper investigation when someone is, under criticism in this way. That seems to me to be the right, the strong, the appropriate response.
Okay, thank you also, mate.
Michael Gove there saying that the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has acted decisively, that he's been strong in the way that he has sacked Nadhim Zahawi. Also saying that it is right to wait for the investigation to be concluded before taking action. People are innocent before proven guilty. Michael Gove there giving the government's defence for the way that they have handled the story of Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs. Well, let's bring back in, shall we, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, for a bit more reaction. I've been listening to what Michael Gove has said there, and also the Labour response that we've had from Andy Burnham and also Bridget Phillipson, who was saying that, look, this investigation's taken 8 days to complete. There's little that we found out that we didn't know already, in their view, and that the Prime Minister should have been much speedier in getting this done, but also Nadhim Zahawi should have stepped aside while the investigation was taking place. Do you think they have a point, or do you think that now that action has been taken, this will help draw a line under the matter?
Well, criticism tends to hurt, tends to land when it falls into a bit of a bigger pattern here. And I think there just is a little bit of an issue about just how quickly Rishi Sunak tends to act when things happen. There is some grumbling about whether it's initiating big plans, whether it's devising policy, whether it's coming up with solutions, whether it's responding to things. There is just a bit of grumbling that I've been picking up in recent days about Rishi Sunak and his team being a little slow to get on the front foot on things. And I suspect that that's one of the problems, but it's tricky. It's been tricky for them, and that's not to pass judgment or otherwise on the situation. But it was just 11 days ago at Prime Minister's Question Time, so that's the Prime Minister's Question Time 2 ago, that Rishi Sunak was saying that Nadhim Zahawi had answered all questions in full about his tax affairs. So that footage of the Prime Minister standing in the Commons talking about Nadhim Zahawi from really the very, very, very recent past will be now put against the decision that he's had to make, completely different decision on the basis of the Laurie Magnus independent advisor letter to get rid of him. So we do have a situation where Rishi Sunak has had to do a total 180-degree pivot, and those things do actually take a few more days than you might want, because he's had to go from defending him at the dispatch box to dispatching him, as it were, and that does just take a little bit of time just to get those gears grinding and in order. And what Downing Street are trying to do this morning is, through the release of the letter which makes it clear that the sacking of Nadhim Zahawi is quite brutal, and by the release of the correspondence with Laurie Magnus, the independent advisor, which makes it clear that Nadhim Zahawi has been sacked for not telling his permanent secretary he was under investigation, for not giving particularly robust public statements, or basically not telling the truth when he was speaking in public. That's the clear implication of the Laurie Magnus letter, and for failing more generally to uphold standards in public life. I think that is a reference to the decision of HMRC to impose a penalty in Nadhim Zahawi, which Laurie Magnus hints but doesn't say completely explicitly ought to be incompatible with staying as a minister. So those are the three reasons. But what the letter does do is provide something else for Downing Street to point to as a reason for Nadhim Zahawi to be sacked this morning, other than Rishi Sunak not asking questions about stories that were in the public domain, not really following up in great deal of detail about what was going on in his personal affairs, even though there were plenty of questions. Because, of course, Sophie, none of this, and it's worth saying, we should have said a bit of this last week, none of this would have come to light without journalism. And in this case, it was Anna Isaac, now of The Guardian, I think then of The Independent, who brought this entire thing to the fore by revealing that there are questions over Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs. And it was the statement issued in response to that that Rory Magnus picks up in his letter that's been released by Downing Street this morning. He implies that that was the response which said there's no investigation was not a fair representation of the truth, because Nadhim Zahawi was well aware of the inquiries by HMRC into his tax affairs. Nadhim Zahawi's defence was, I didn't realise that amounted to an investigation. Rory Magnus says, come on, that's clearly not quite right. Therefore, the public statements and the internal government positions that Nadhim Zahawi took during the period that he was investigated by HMRC, which included the period where he was Chancellor with responsibility for HMRC, those public statements did not constitute, or basically weren't true, and that constituted a breach of the ministerial code, and that's why he's being sacked this morning. So that's the case for defence for Rishi Sunak. It was all about Boris era and Liz Truss era problems in government, rather than a failure to dig deep earlier on in his time in government. That's the problem, Downing Street. By the way, Sophie, there'll be no appointment of a successor. Chief Executive of the Tory party will take over Nadhim Zahawi's duties. No appointment today of a successor.
OK, that's interesting to know. Sam, one thought to finish on. It feels to me like there's an awful lot of big beasts on the backbenches right now, which can, of course, be unhelpful, shall we say, to the current Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss. Nadhim Zahawi going to the backbenches. How do you predict he's going to be?
Nadhim Zahawi is a popular minister. He got great kudos for his work as a vaccines minister. He tried to go for the leadership, for which you need a considerable groundswell of support. But I have to say, even amongst people who backed him for the leadership, there wasn't much sympathy for him. The question is, what is Nadhim Zahawi going to do? He's even going to stay as an MP. Lib Dems calling for him to stand down. But you're right, I think there's wider trouble on the Tory backbenches. Malcontent former ministers, cabinet ministers, and, as you say, prime ministers. The Tory party is quite broken after the last few years of turmoil, and this won't help.
Thank you very much, as always, for your analysis. A very busy day for us today on the programme, so always good to have your analysis. I'll let you go back to reading the full recommendations for the report. Lots of news, breaking news for us this morning, and the situation changing very quickly from the initial interview that we did with Michael Gove, where he said that, look, I've got no idea, we don't know, I can't tell you when the report is being unveiled, only for that to drop in our inboxes just before 9 a.m. this morning. The full report by the ethics advisor, Solori, and also, of course, the reply from the Prime Minister, where he says that he's made the decision to remove Nadhim Zahawi from his role as chairman. No opportunity for Nadhim Zahawi to resign. And it was a damning report into the former Tory chairman, concluding that he did not declare the HMRC investigation when he was initially appointed as Chancellor, and as a result, he has now been sacked from the government. Well, that is it for this week's Sophy Ridge on Sunday. We will have lots more coverage on the sacking of Nadhim Zahawi at the top of the hour, so do stay with us. Thank you, as always, for joining us this Sunday morning.